There was a priest in the United States who, one day he got a call. He was a priest who was ordained about 7 years. He lived in Boston. He got a phone call from his family who lived over in San Francisco. And they informed him that one of his cousins was dying and he wanted the priest to come and see him. They were good Catholics, but he was related, so they thought it would be lovely because he had a fatal disease. So Father Jim flew out from Boston, if any of you know, to San Francisco. It's as far away as America is to Ireland. Anyway, when he arrived at the hospital, he was dressed as a priest. And there was a little nun standing at the door of the hospital. And when she saw him, she said, "Father, I'm so delighted. I am so glad you're here." And he was kind of surprised because he wasn't from there. He thought, does she mix me up with somebody else? And then she said to him, "I want you to do me a big favor. I really am desperate." She said, "There's a man in Ward 4, and he's dying. He's bitter. He's angry. And every time a priest comes in and he sees the Roman collar, he starts screaming at him to leave. And they leave." But she said, "Listen, Father, he's going to die very soon. So please, please, would you please go in? And don't leave. If he curses you and swears at you, please don't leave. Just stand there and talk to him and wait until he gets over this ranting and shouting and screaming." So the priest said, she said, "I know you're here to visit somebody, but would you do this first?" So the priest, who was probably around 35 years of age, maybe a little older, he was a kind of surprised. So he walked into the room, and there was a person on his own in the room. And when the man, who looked very angry, looked desperate, he sat halfway up in the bed and he started screaming foul language, cursing, saying, "I don't want you. I don't want anybody in this room. And I don't want you from the church. And I don't belong to the church." And so the priest stood his ground. And he said, "Why are you so angry? I'm just here to give you a little blessing and to say a prayer for you." And he said, "You don't know who I am." And he looked at him, and the priest said back, "No, I don't know who you are, but I do know that the Lord loves you and that you have to be willing to open your heart to him." And the man looked at him and said, "He doesn't want anything to do with me." And the priest got into a dialogue. And then he said to the priest, "You have no idea. I spent my life in jail. I murdered a whole family." So the priest said, "Well, even the time you spent in jail, you did your penance." And he, tried to say, "And Jesus can forgive. His mercy is great. He can forgive anybody. It doesn't matter what you did. That's the power of Jesus' love for you." And the man looked at me and he said, "But you don't understand. I was a drug addict and I was an alcoholic." And he said, "Many years ago, I went to work. I was a train changer. When the trains all coming in and out, his job was to change the train on the track." He said, "I fell asleep and I didn't change it. And a mother and a father and 3 children were just killed." And the priest looked at him. He was silent. And then he said to him, "What year? Was that 1976? And he looked at him. He said, "How do you know? Really, how do you know it was?" And he said, "Because that was my mother and father and my 3 brothers." He said, "And I'm their son." He wasn't with them in the car. He was playing soccer. He was a little boy at school. And he said, "I forgive you. And I'm a Catholic priest. And I can forgive you. I can through me." And the man just looked at him. He said, if I forgive you, think of what Jesus does. And the man started to cry. He just broke down. And he made the most beautiful confession. And he died the next day. But the interesting part was that the priest walked out. He was very moved. And he told this friend that we know, he said, you know, for all those years, I never actually knew the circumstance. I knew that my parents were killed in an accident. I knew that it was a train, but I didn't know anything else. I was only 6. And he said, but think that today I heard the confession and had the opportunity to stand for Jesus, not only in his own humanity, in his humanness, saying the words, but I forgive you. But he told the man, he said, you didn't kill, you didn't murder my parents and my brothers. You had an addiction. There's a difference. You didn't do it intentionally. You were addicted to drugs and alcohol. And he said, he told his friend, he said, you know, his life changed. What? He was immediately the man's face. You know, it's like the soul was in torment. And this is what Jesus promised. And that's why I say to you, we all have family members who are lapsed Catholics or people who are addicted to alcohol, to drugs, whatever. I plead with you, never think that the chaplet isn't powerful, because when Father walked out and he said about his own priesthood, he said, you know, it changed my life. It was the most wonderful spiritual encounter. I felt I was standing, brought all the way from Boston. That little nun had prayed the Divine Mercy, not once a day, but numerous times. She used to visit, you know, the sick. She was an elderly nun. And she would go around the wards, you know, and just talk to them about the mercy of Jesus. And she was desperate for this one sinner, this one man. And think how God answered it, that he brought the very boy, the very priest. That's the power of divine mercy. That's what Jesus can do.